Imagine discovering that the person you built a life with wasn't just breaking promises, but living a double life behind your back. What would you do if betrayal didn't end with confession, but with lies that kept multiplying? In today's story, you'll see how one husband uncovered every secret, every excuse, and how his choice of divorce became the moment his unfaithful wife completely fell apart. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about courage, boundaries, and the cost of truth. Stay with me because the twists ahead will shock you. And if you love dramatic stories of betrayal and revenge, make sure to subscribe to Cheating Stories 7, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments. So now, let's dive into this powerful story. She betrayed our marriage, but her breakdown came when I chose divorce. From the sidewalk, our life behaves itself. The hedges never dare to grow wild. The porch light learns dusk by heart. Two backpacks hang on their hooks like soldiers on duty, and the bikes lean into each other in a comfortable slouch that whispers, "We live here, we return, we belong." Inside, routine impersonates intimacy. The coffee grinder hums faithfully at 6. I nudge the thermostat warmer because Vanessa likes the kitchen to feel like July, even in March. The dog skitters across the hardwood like a metronome, keeping time for a song I have quietly stopped singing. The picture looks whole, but it is only a picture. What breaks first is not the glass, but the grammar of us. Questions lose their reasons. She answers with timestamps instead of stories. Her phone begins sleeping face down, as if turned toward the table in some silent prayer. Night runs become ritual, the kind performed by someone who needs alibis more than endorphins. The shower wakes at odd hours, and steam writes temporary lies on the mirror. I read them before they vanish. They say nothing, and they say enough. I do not accuse, I observe. A small spiral notebook lies in the drawer with the takeout menus. I write down harmless facts until they stop feeling harmless. Tuesday, home at 10:47. Thursday, 38 minutes unaccounted for. Card charge at a place we have never been together. She tells me she is exhausted. The receipts tell me she is wide awake somewhere else. I am not building a case to win. I am building a memory that cannot be gaslit, a testimony written in ink before someone tries to erase it. Around the children, I build steadiness like scaffolding. Homework spreads across the table under a lamp that flatters effort. We sound out words, practice fractions, tape spelling lists to the fridge with the same magnet that once held a postcard from our honeymoon. My son explains offsides with hand gestures so serious I almost laugh. My daughter reads to the dog because the dog never interrupts. When bedtime comes, I make my voice even and warm. Your world is safe, I tell them without saying the words. Your world is safe because I will make it so. Vanessa and I perform the choreography of people who once knew all the same counts. We pass plates. We pass towels fresh from the dryer. We pass in hallways with smiles so small they do not reach either set of eyes. She is careful now, which is to say she is different. The playlist in her car shifts to songs I do not know. A new perfume arrives without a new bottle, carried in on the wool of her coat and the collar of her sweater. I learn the scent the way sailors learn currents, by what it promises to carry away. People imagine betrayal as a siren. Mine is a hum. It lives behind everything like electricity, animating the ordinary, threatening to black out the moment something surges. I go for runs that have nothing to do with fitness, only with returning to a house where my breath can pretend to have a reason for being short. I choose routes that pass the school, the park, the library, landmarks that remind me where love is still uncomplicated and where it will remain no matter what. The notebook grows heavier without gaining weight. I add calendar crumbs, a pattern of gym check-ins that never correspond to sweat. I note the necklace she says she bought with a coupon, even though I know the brand does not believe in coupons. And finally, I add a sentence I do not want to write. I am done being the only adult in a conversation no one is having. The sentence sits there, still and patient, like a packed bag on the floor of a room where someone is pretending not to leave. I try on 100 ways to begin a confrontation and abandon them all. Every version feels like I am auditioning for the part of the man who made her do it. I will not audition. I will narrate. When the day comes, I will set the facts on the table between us like ordinary objects, a calendar, a receipt, a phone bill, a map. Until then, I will protect the children from the vocabulary of our failure. They do not need to learn the word affair to understand the shape of absence. The quiet changes temperature. It is no longer the hush of peace, but the pressure before weather breaks. I can feel the house listening to us, the way old structures do, remembering other storms and trusting its beams. I stand in the kitchen one evening while the dishwasher breathes, the window fogs, and the porch light flicks on as if nothing on earth could surprise it. Vanessa sets her mug down and looks at the floor the way people do when they hope an answer is written there. I ask a simple question about the weekend. She gives a simple answer that does not include me. Something in me stops pleading. Not with her, pleading with the picture I carried of us for years, the picture that always edited out the cost. I rinse a plate, wipe a crumb, flip the dish towel over the sink. The gestures feel like sentences, like punctuation. Period, new paragraph, new page. The truth is not loud, it is decided. I close the notebook and put it back with the menus. I know how this story ends, or at least how my part must. Not with a scene, not with shouting, with paperwork. Because what she detonated months ago does not leave shrapnel. It leaves holes that cannot be sewn closed with apologies. Tomorrow I will call a lawyer. Tonight I will read 2 chapters, tuck in 2 children, and turn off 2 small lamps that do not belong to this war. The morning after I chose paperwork over pleading, I moved the notebook from the kitchen drawer into my briefcase. It wasn't about secrecy, it was about light. A stove bulb at midnight had been enough when I was only doubting. Now, with decision in my bones, the truth deserved better lighting. Sunlight, desk lamps, scanners. Facts should not have to whisper. Bank statements turned into trail maps. Small charges in neighborhoods we never visited. A cafe receipt at 10:43 p.m. on a Tuesday, followed by a hotel authorization at 11:10. Same block, same orbit. The numbers didn't accuse, they aligned. They formed constellations I did not want to trace, but constellations nonetheless. Rideshare histories told their own story. Her night runs were supposed to start and end at our street. The app disagreed. Pickups 2 miles east. Drop-offs a few blocks from a hotel whose lobby smells of eucalyptus and new money. Surge pricing made timestamps precise in a way lies could not blur. I exported the data twice, cloud and external drive. I wasn't arguing with a person anymore. I was charting physics, choices equal outcomes, and gravity never loses. Calendar crumbs were the most unsettling. 38-minute blocks that repeated like ritual, always wrapped by 10-minute drives. At first I thought it was coincidence. By the 3rd time, a pattern. By the 6th, the blocks carried their own gravity. I printed the month view and circled what I didn't want to circle. When I squinted, the page looked like a constellation. When I didn't, it looked like a map of where trust goes to die. I rehearsed silence the way actors rehearse lines. What not to say became my discipline. Do not ask questions you already know the answers to. Do not invite lies you will only resent. Do not trade the truth for the relief of an argument. My plan required one conversation that held. Until then, I trained myself in the art of restraint. The revelation, when it came, was bureaucratic. A reply-all from the youth soccer coordinator carried a spreadsheet of volunteer slots. Richard Hale's name was there, email, phone, availability. His windows overlapped perfectly with Vanessa's 38-minute blocks and the boutique hotel's loyalty calendar. There was even a note about a mixer at a wine bar on the same block as those late-night receipts. My pulse didn't spike, it slowed, like a metronome dragged down by weight. The diagram in my head drew its final arrow without leaving color to bleed. Romance, fidelity, intimacy. I stopped caring what label their meetings carried. Labels don't matter when custody and assets are at stake. Screenshots mattered, exports mattered, PDFs mattered. I saved everything in triplicate, thumb drive taped under a desk drawer, folder at my office, cloud account she didn't know existed. Paranoia is what the guilty call preparation. At home, the surface remained undisturbed. She laced up shoes for another run. I asked if she wanted the reflective vest. She smiled, waved me off, and I wrote it down. Wednesday, 9:12 p.m., waved off vest. Later, the shower came alive. Steam crawled across the mirror while I brushed my teeth, toothpaste foam hiding questions I refused to ask. The notebook sat closed on the counter, looking innocent, almost devotional, like a church pamphlet. Guilt doesn't always show itself in presence. More often, it shows itself in absence, missing details, missing warmth, missing curiosity. She stopped asking about my deadlines. She started over-explaining lateness. She leaned on the word just the way liars do when they need bridges over canyons. I just lost track of time. I just grabbed a snack. I just needed to clear my head. The more justs, the less justice. With the children, I doubled down on promises. The bedtime book stretched one chapter longer. Saturday pancakes came with extra fruit. On the fridge, their calendar, school concerts, picture day, meetings, stayed sacred. I wrote in block letters, firm ink. I wanted them to believe reliability was still a thing, even if adults around them treated life like pencil drafts. Sometimes Fury begged me to slam the binder down, to catch her in a doorway, to demand theatrics, confession, tears, thunder. But Fury only writes noise. Noise echoes in children's rooms long after adults stop listening. My plan was not catharsis. It was custody, logistics, structure. Don't shout when a signed document will do. Don't negotiate with stories when numbers already told the truth. In the evenings, after the house settled into the hush of sleep, I practiced the day I would finally speak. I laid out sentences like instructions for assembling glass. Receipts first, then statements, then rideshare maps, then the calendar. Do not narrate what it means. Let the objects do the speaking. Say the words once. End the meeting. Leave feelings for adults who can be trusted with them. I did not feel brave. I felt organized. I did not feel like a winner. I felt like a librarian cataloging a section no one wanted to admit existed. But order has its own mercy. It would carry me through the pretending, past the accusations, beyond the theater. Paper is quiet, but it never forgets. Withdrawal is not dramatic. It is measured like dimming a light until a room stops insisting on brightness. I learned how to move that dimmer switch inside myself. When Vanessa asked if I could grab milk on the way home, I said yes. When she asked if I had seen her charger, I said no. When an answer required more than a syllable, I used maybe or I don't know and left the rest of the sentence unbuilt. It wasn't punishment. It was a ceasefire with someone who had already joined another army. I timed my errands so I would be out when she was in. The children did not need to live in parallel rooms, listening to the silence sharpen itself against the walls. On nights when the dog wanted a longer walk, I obliged, tracing routes past the lit windows of other families. At dusk, you can see too much. Silhouettes leaning close, laughter spilling over bowls, someone's head thrown back without fear. It wasn't envy that stung. It was memory of once having belonged inside my own light. At home, I kept my voice steady, not distant steady. I asked about homework, projects, tomorrow's plans. I made dinner with the kind of attention that remembers how someone likes their toast cut. The children responded the way seedlings do under a lamp. They reached. They told me small things that sounded like big things. My son described a science experiment with such seriousness that even the dog lay down to listen. My daughter learned to crack eggs without leaving shells in the bowl. Each night we stacked our quiet victories, a quiz studied, a page read, a joke that landed. We wrote them on the chalkboard by the fridge like a shared weather report. But questions sharpened anyway. Children always know. Are you and Mom okay? Is never their first question. It is what they ask when every other answer has failed. One Saturday morning, I sat them at the table and gave the speech every parent rehearses and prays never to give. We both love you. This isn't your fault. Sometimes adults cannot stay together, and that is about adults, not children. We will still be your parents every morning and every night. I kept the words plain. Children don't need ornate explanations. They need railings to hold. I did not stage the divorce as theater. I placed a stack of invoices from the attorney on the shared desk. Not hidden, not underlined, just there. A clock, not a threat. Time had already been moving, now it simply had numbers. Vanessa said nothing. Silence can be arrogance, calculation, or fear. After months of it, you stop translating and start planning your exit. New information arrived quietly. A notification pinged from a budgeting app we had long ignored. An account I didn't recognize had activity. A restaurant on a weeknight when we were supposedly both home. A ride service at an hour when our house was dark. Another hotel authorization that matched the 38-minute blocks I had already circled. The secondary account was linked to her email, funded by transfers small enough to slip by, regular enough to tell their own truth. The ledger grew teeth. I built columns, date, vendor, amount, excuse offered, if any. No adjectives, no emotion. Feelings plead too loudly, numbers stand straighter. Each reconciliation between receipts and life told me the same thing. She wasn't unlucky, she was decided. Some nights fury wanted to borrow my mouth. The easy drama would have been to slam the list on the table, demand confessions, provoke tears. But I had already lived months inside her performance. I would not audition for another act of it. My plan was simpler, one clean conversation, documented, final. Anything else would echo in the children's rooms for years. Vanessa began over-explaining the way guilty people try to be graded for effort instead of truth. A new running route, a new yoga friend, a new reason her battery kept dying. Details scattered like confetti, colorful everywhere, impossible to gather into a shape that could stand. I nodded, answered with small sounds, responded like someone listening to weather reports from an imaginary country. Nods, HM, okay. My refusal to argue unsettled her. Some people need the fight more than the outcome. I wanted only the outcome. The children adjusted with brave pragmatism that humbled me. They counted nights with each parent, correcting the math if it felt unfair. They invented a ritual, one good thing about the day, one hard thing. Sometimes the hard thing was soggy cereal. Sometimes it was that mom seemed tired all the time. I didn't try to fix what I couldn't fix. I said thank you for telling me, and I meant it. By the 6th month, the house split into 2 atmospheres. In mine, air was ordinary, dinners, laundry, laughter that rose when it had a reason. In hers, air was staged. Sudden wellness kicks, strict routines bending around invisible appointments, a phone that demanded privacy like an honored guest. Our orbits crossed politely, then separated again with the grace of strangers who know not to collide. Then came the final note in this long rehearsal. The budgeting app flagged a concert ticket purchase, 2 seats side by side on a night when I had been at a parent-teacher conference alone. The venue was a block from the boutique hotel. The receipt timestamp kissed the start time of the show. I didn't need revelation. What I had was accumulation. I closed the ledger and slid it into the folder with the invoices, the rideshare maps, the calendar. The future now had its own paper trail. When I pictured the conversation ahead, I stripped away all adjectives and old prayers. There would be facts. There would be a plan for the children. There would be signatures. Everything else could stay outside in the weather where it belonged. The first time I saw Clara again, it wasn't in a dramatic setting. Not a reunion staged by fate or scripted by longing. Just a Sunday grocery store where carts orbit like distracted planets and the hum of self-checkout machines becomes the day's background music. She stood 3 places ahead of me, studying a bunch of cilantro as if it might confess something. Recognition wasn't cinematic. It was quieter, deeper, an ache that remembered its own shape. Years ago, we had been almost. Conversations that lasted longer than they should have, hands that nearly brushed, timing that never cooperated. We never crossed the line, but the line had been visible. Now she turned, saw me, and smiled with a steadiness that didn't ask permission. No performance, no agenda, just arrival, We didn't pretend to be strangers. "Ethan," she said, my name sounding like a sentence resumed after a long pause. She carried herself with the kind of composure that didn't seek attention. It simply made space. I asked how she'd been. She said good in a way that carried both griefs and victories without decorating either. I realized I had been living inside noise for months, and this was the first sound that felt clean. We stepped aside near a display of seasonal candles, and I told her the truth without ornaments, separated in practice, not in paper. Two children who deserved rooms that didn't echo with adult decisions, a plan to file once the ledger could speak without me. I didn't beg for sympathy, and she didn't hand any out like a blanket. She listened the way good witnesses do, letting facts carry their own weight. "Do you want advice?" she asked after a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. "Only if it respects the mess," I said. "It does," she answered. "If there's going to be a future with me, it can't begin as an overlap." She didn't say it to punish me. She said it like someone handing a map to a traveler who keeps circling the same road. "Finish what you must, cleanly, then call me. I am not a secret passage. I am a door that opens in daylight." Her words landed like a carpenter's level, settling everything uneven inside me. I saw what it corrected. The hunger for relief disguised as urgency, the temptation to cauterize wounds with new warmth. I understood the version of myself I wanted my children to remember. A man who could wait, who valued boundaries over spectacle, who believed love only remains love when it respects lines. We talked for 10 more minutes, not selling stories, not inventing roles. She told me she ran a small design studio, intentionally small, kept at a size she could carry without resentment. I told her I had learned the opposite lesson, how quickly a life can become so crowded you cannot hear yourself think. We laughed at almost nothing, and it felt earned. At the register, she miscounted her apples, and I offered one of mine. It was nothing. It was everything. Ordinary kindness can carry more weight than grand declarations. She wrote her number on the back of a receipt and folded it into my palm with a look that was both warmth and refusal. "Do not use this until your house is in order," she said. "If you call before you're done, I won't answer. If you call after, I will." It is a rare gift to be told no in a way that makes you feel trusted. I tucked the slip into my wallet like a promise I would have to earn. The produce in my cart suddenly looked different. Cilantro, bread, milk, as if the future had insisted on being fed. Back home, I unpacked the groceries. Cilantro in water, bread in the bin, milk in the fridge. The ordinary choreography of a kitchen felt both unspectacular and holy. The children argued about whether pancake shapes could be considered animals. Vanessa texted late, again, sorry. I replied with a neutral thumbs up. Boundaries are not punishments. They are locks you hold the key to. For the first time in months, I felt that key fit my hand. That night when the house finally stilled, I took out the folded receipt, read the number, and returned it to my wallet. I didn't dial. I didn't fantasize. I rinsed the counter, set out breakfast bowls for the morning, and slid the folder of statements back into its drawer. For months, I had been chasing the relief of an ending. Now, Clara's boundary gave me something better, the integrity of one. I chose a Tuesday because Tuesdays carry no drama of their own. The kids were at a friend's house for dinner. The dog slept in a crescent at the foot of the couch. On the table, I set 2 glasses of water and kept the folder beside my knee. When Vanessa walked in, I didn't ask how her day was. I didn't ask where she had been. I asked her to sit. "I'm going to speak once," I said, steady in a way that felt borrowed from a stronger version of myself. The version that had been keeping ledgers while the rest of me tried to sleep. "I know about Richard. I have no questions. I'm not interested in debate. I am finalizing a separation and filing for divorce." The first sound she made wasn't a word. It was fabric tearing under sudden weight. Her face collapsed into a grief I could not mistake for love. Apologies spilled out in every shape they could find. Desperate to fit into any container, she had been lost, she had felt unseen, she could change everything, she would delete everyone, she would prove anything. She reached for my hand. I left mine in my lap. The false mercy would have been to offer contact. The real mercy was to let clarity stay undisturbed. This is not a feelings trial, I said. This is a logistics meeting. The time to fix a family is before you break it, not after. I slid a single sheet across the table. It was written in nouns, not adjectives. Separation date, temporary schedule for the children who sleeps where, a proposal for finances, a mediator's name. One non-negotiable, I said. The children's stability outranks every adult emotion in this room. She shook her head as if the gesture could rearrange the past. It didn't mean anything, she whispered again, words that sounded like counterfeit currency. She tried bargains, therapy, promises, declarations of love, memories of holidays and songs, but each offer carried a string that pulled us backward. I'm not looking for the right speech, I said. I'm looking for signatures. I told her the children would remain in their school. Bedtimes would not become negotiations. Exchanges would happen curbside at agreed-upon times without improvisation. Communication would go through a co-parenting app. Adult visitors would not be introduced to the children without mutual agreement. Overnights were off the table. I didn't say Richard's name again. Once was enough. Her tears came in waves, loud, then soft, then loud again, searching for the right volume of contrition. She said she couldn't live without me, that she had never stopped loving me. But the account those words were trying to draw from had long been emptied. It isn't cruelty to refuse an overdraft. When did you stop loving me? She asked finally, her voice a fragile verdict. I didn't, I answered, and the truth startled us both. I stopped pretending trust can be repaired by the person who broke it telling me it can. I let the sentence sit between us like a sealed envelope, then I tapped the paper. This is the plan. If you need time to respond, take it. If you need an attorney, hire one. If you want to adjust logistics for the kids, I'll review it, but we are done with ambiguity. She turned to the sink, gripping the counter as though it could argue for her. The sobbing shifted, no longer sharp, more like rhythm she had practiced. I waited. When she faced me again, her expression had changed, calculation replacing collapse. What will people think? She asked, as if shame could reverse gravity. I will tell them as little as possible, I said, because our children have to live here, and because I am not interested in hurting you in public. I am interested in protecting them in private. We moved line by line through the list. She objected to the co-parenting app until I reminded her misunderstandings become weapons too easily. She resisted curbside exchanges until I pointed out how quickly small scenes turn into large ones. She asked to keep keys to the house where I would stay with the kids. I said no. Boundaries are not punishments. They are instructions for keeping everyone safe. When her sobs grew too loud for words, I stood, set my glass in the sink, and stepped into the other room. The framed photos on the wall seemed to tilt under their own weight. I thought of Clara's voice in the grocery store, the compass she had handed me. Finish cleanly, then call. I had taken the first step. The floor beneath me held. I returned to the table. I'm going to call Julia, I said. Someone should sit with you. Vanessa tried to protest, then stopped. I sent the message, asked if she wanted me to wait in the other room. She nodded. Gratitude flickered in her eyes, confusing me until I understood. Relief is still relief, even when it arrives at the end of a story. When Julia knocked, I opened the door, explained in simple terms. She saw the tissues, the list, the silence that followed. She nodded once to me, once to her sister, then guided Vanessa down the hall. Alone, I placed the paper back into the folder and slid it into the drawer. Then I texted the kid's friend's mother that I was on my way. On the way out, I flipped off the porch light, the same switch I had touched 1,000 times. For the first time, it felt like the period at the end of a sentence. Julia arrived with the posture of someone bracing for weather. She kept her coat clutched close, eyes scanning past me into the living room before settling on Vanessa, whose face was raw from the kind of crying that hopes to cast a spell. "Can we talk?" Vanessa asked, already guiding, already staging. I gestured toward the table, 2 glasses of water. The folder closed, a pen lying still as if waiting for a verdict. Julia sat at the edge of the chair as though the furniture itself might take sides. She glanced between us, measuring, unsure which truth would hold. Vanessa began with a script. We were having a misunderstanding. That mistakes had been made, that marriage is work, that I was overreacting. Words that had been used too many times in too many kitchens. She reached for the old vocabulary as if it could still unlock a door. I let her finish. Interruptions become exhibits for people who need them. When silence finally fell, I opened the folder. I laid out the evidence like a dealer spreading cards. Dates, places, balances, the 38-minute blocks, the rideshare maps, the boutique hotel's polite thank you emails that read like diary entries from a building. My voice never rose. I did not narrate what the papers already screamed. This is the timeline, I said. I'm not here to argue feelings. I'm here to end a marriage with clarity and to protect the children while we do it. Julia leaned forward, a small movement, but it mattered. Her eyes followed the captions of our unraveling, her lips pressed into a line. She asked two practical questions, a date, a location, and I answered them like a clerk, not a husband. When Vanessa's phone vibrated, she muttered, "I have to take this," and slipped down the hall. The room exhaled. Julia's shoulders dropped by a fraction. When she looked at me again, her gaze had changed temperature. "I'm sorry," she said, not as performance, but as judgment she had reached on her own. Her hand went to her bag. From it she produced a small thumb drive the color of a decision. She set it on the table between the water rings and the pen. "I shouldn't have it," she whispered, voice low and urgent. "And I shouldn't be the one giving it to you, but I can't keep watching her lie to everyone, including herself." "What is it?" I asked, though I already felt the weight of time inside that plastic. "Screenshots, photos, old messages, a calendar export." She swallowed. "It goes back further than she told you. A year and a half, maybe more if you count the first messages that pretended to be jokes." Her eyes flicked toward the hallway. I tried to pull her back. She called me judgmental. Then she asked me to cover once, and I did. I have hated that version of me ever since. Her eyes shone, not with pity, but with disgust at her own complicity. "Please don't use it to hurt her for sport," she said, "but please do use it to keep yourself and the kids safe." I picked up the drive. It was astonishing how light proof can feel when its contents are heavy enough to redirect a future. "I won't parade it," I promised. "But if anyone tries to rewrite this in public or in court, I will have a record that doesn't forget." She nodded, relief and regret folding into one gesture. "That's all I can ask." Then softer, almost to herself, "That's all you should ever have had to ask for." We sat in silence that felt careful, like the way you sit near a sleeping child. Julia spoke again, painting in details I hadn't asked for but needed to see the full outline of the parallel life. A work conference that wasn't about work, a story about a sick friend that didn't match the dates, a necklace that appeared without receipt or occasion. "It was never an accident," she said. "It was an arrangement. Every time she chose it, she had to become a little more cruel to make the math work." I believed her because the ledger already had. The thumb drive wasn't a dagger, it was corroboration. Betrayal isn't one decision. It's a bridge built out of countless planks, each chosen, each nailed into place. Footsteps returned. Vanessa reappeared, face rearranged for her next tactic. Julia's hand withdrew quickly from the table, hiding itself in her lap. "Everything okay?" Vanessa asked, scanning the room. I slid the folder across the thumb drive and nodded. "We're discussing logistics," I said. The temperature dropped. Vanessa looked at Julia as if loyalty could be commanded by stare alone. Julia's voice was steady when she answered. "Ethan is being clear," she said. "You should be clear too." It was the closest thing to a public confession she could manage without setting the house on fire. We returned to the script of logistics, pickup times, drop-off locations, holiday schedules written in the children's names rather than ours. Vanessa balked at some points, nodded at others, circled back to therapy like repetition could change its value. I let the minutes accumulate. When the meeting ended, I stood. "Thank you for coming," I told Julia. It meant more than the words admitted. She touched my arm once, part benediction, part warning. "Be careful," she whispered. "The story will try to eat you if you feed it. Don't." After they left, I locked the door. I set the drive on the counter under the kitchen lamp where I had once written grocery lists. I didn't open it, not yet. Instead, I slid it into an envelope marked with today's date, then placed it in the folder beside the statements, maps, invoices. Evidence, yes, but not a weapon. A shield, waiting, patient, silent. The house sounded different afterward, not healed, houses don't heal, but steadier. I rinsed the glasses, wiped the ring off the table, and wrote a single line inside the folder before putting it away. This was not a lapse. It was a life she built beside yours. The sentence didn't make me bitter. It made me accurate. And accuracy is the only thing that has never lied to me. The first rumor didn't arrive as an accusation. It came disguised as concern. A friend of a friend pulled me aside at school pickup, asking if I was doing okay in a tone that assumed the opposite. By the weekend, whispers had learned to walk on their own. I was cold. I was inattentive. I was never home. In the moms group, a thread bloomed under a post about burnout, and a familiar voice described a lonely wife with a checked-out husband. No names, but the geography was unmistakable. People prefer their villains labeled. When they are not, they draw their own outlines. I refused to campaign. Instead, I cooked dinner. I checked math homework. I clapped in bleachers at the right moments. When someone dangled bait, an invitation to share my side, I lifted my shoulders and let the bait drift. My silence was not nobility. It was discipline. I had seen what noise buys, nothing you can spend on your children. Vanessa curated her narrative carefully, like arranging shelves. She practiced the grammar of almost driven to it, the rhetoric of misunderstanding, the soft power of size. I was lonely, said with just enough tilt to point toward my supposed neglect. It played well in rooms where people didn't know what boutique hotel loyalty points look like when they thank you by name. In boxes and folders, my evidence waited like clean tools. I didn't post. I didn't correct gossip. I didn't argue with the plural of rumor. Instead, I made pancakes on Saturday, labeled the syrup, signed permission slips, kept appointments. Every controlled sentence became an act of resistance against the script I hadn't written but was expected to perform. Then an unexpected message lit my inbox. Meredith Hale, Richard's wife. She introduced herself without apology, her words steady, her tone stripped of theater. She wrote that she had suspected for months, that her gut had been dismissed as insecurity, that she had started saving things because disbelief is easier to argue with when it is printed. She asked for clarity and promised caution. She wasn't looking to compare wounds. She wanted dates. We spoke on the phone like two people diffusing the same explosive from opposite ends. She read me her list: Tuesdays, Thursdays, late-night absences. They matched the 38-minute windows I had already circled. I shared the outline of what I had, numbers, not adjectives. I told her what I told myself: do not move until filings are safer than fury. Protect your rights. Protect your children. If you must speak, speak once, document it, then let silence carry the rest. The dots clicked into place with mechanical precision. Practice nights, wine bars, rideshare pickups that curved toward the same hotel. Meredith's tone didn't sharpen, it cooled. "Thank you," she said, and in those words I heard the sound of someone whose floor had finally stopped pretending to be uncertain. I warned her about blowback. If you set off alarms before you own the exits, you trap yourself inside the building you're trying to leave. She understood. She wasn't after spectacle, she was after safety. We agreed to keep contact minimal to let attorneys do the carrying when the time came. I saved her email in a folder under a name only I would recognize. Independent corroboration. Parallel timeline. It wasn't vindication I felt, it was orientation. There's a difference between winning and not being lost. Meanwhile, whispers multiplied. An acquaintance posted vaguely about men who break quietly and call it dignity. Someone liked it who had never once liked anything of mine. At practice, a coach squeezed my shoulder like an apology he couldn't risk putting into words. The urge to publish everything, the receipts, the maps, the ledger, rose hot in my chest and died at the same wall I had built for myself. This was not about punishing Vanessa. This was about protecting the children, so I stayed boring in public. I returned library books on time. I said no to invitations that needed babysitters, yes to backyard soccer that needed nothing but breath. When the kids asked why Mom seemed sad, I said adults sometimes make choices that bring sadness. When they asked if we were okay, I told them we were safe. Safety is not the same as happiness, but it is where happiness learns to stand. Vanessa shifted tactics. On Monday, I was distant. On Wednesday, controlling. By Friday, absent. Each version painted her as the reluctant heroine. It would have been easy to hate her for it, but hate is labor, and I needed my hands for other work. Besides, the ledger had already convinced me of something more useful. Anyone who edits reality this often cannot be trusted as narrator in any genre. Meredith checked in once more. She had consulted counsel, adjusted passwords, opened a private P.O. box. She hid nothing from her children except details they couldn't use. She didn't ask what I planned to do with the information we had traded. I told her the truth. Nothing yet, and maybe nothing ever in public. I would use it only if the narrative tried to trespass into a courtroom. Otherwise, the story would starve without my lines. That night, I printed our exchange, slid it into the folder, and returned it to its place. Then I washed the last pan, turned off the kitchen light, and stood in the doorway until the new axis of my life felt solid. The path ahead no longer pointed toward a scene where I got even. It pointed toward a life where even no longer applied. The mediation room was painted the color of compromise. Beige walls, beige chairs, beige carpet meant to neutralize tempers. A single framed print of a sailboat pretended calm on the far wall. The mediator, a woman with glasses perched low on her nose, greeted us with professional warmth that had the weight of someone who had seen every version of a marriage dissolve. Vanessa arrived late, flustered but styled, as if the room might grade her on presentation. She avoided my eyes, then overcompensated with smiles aimed at the mediator. I carried only a folder, its spine familiar in my hand. Neutral on the outside, sharp within. We sat across from each other, water glasses between us like fragile peacekeepers. The mediator began with her script. This was not court, this was conversation, a chance to find common ground, to avoid escalation. But mediation requires honesty, and honesty was already the absent party. Vanessa started first, her voice soft, her words rehearsed. "I just want what's best for the kids," she said, the line polished by 100 mirrors. She painted herself as flexible, cooperative, misunderstood. She slipped in phrases about my distance, about how she had tried so hard, how she hoped we could co-parent with love. Her performance was clean, almost convincing, until you noticed how every sentence rearranged the past in her favor. I let her play the part. Then when it was my turn, I opened the folder. One by one, I slid documents forward, expense reports, rideshare maps, hotel statements, the thumb drives, corroborated screenshots printed in sequence. No commentary, just paper finding its voice. The mediator adjusted her glasses, scanning the evidence. Her lips tightened. She didn't say betrayal, mediators never do. But her silence was an admission. The narrative Vanessa had staged could not stand on these legs. Vanessa's smile cracked. She reached for indignation. "You're humiliating me," she hissed. "No," I said. My tone didn't rise. "I'm clarifying what we're mediating. We're not negotiating whether it happened. We're negotiating what happens next." Her face shifted through masks, sorrow, anger, disbelief, even laughter, brittle as glass, when none of them landed. She tried weaponized pity. "Do you really want to destroy me?" I looked at the mediator, not her. "I want stability for the children. That is all I am here for." The mediator nodded, her pen moving briskly. "Then let's outline custody schedules." She spoke with the calm of someone steering a ship through storm by ignoring the waves and focusing only on coordinates. Vanessa pushed back on nearly every clause: weeknights, weekends, holidays, who would keep the dog. Each objection felt less like logistics and more like attempts to reclaim ground she had already lost. At one point, she slammed her hand against the table, the water glass trembling. "You're turning everyone against me." I kept my gaze steady. "You did that yourself." The air thickened. For a moment, I thought she might actually tip the table, might let the fury she had been editing burst into the open. The knife of the session wasn't literal. It was sharp words, cutting looks, the blade of someone who realizes they are losing the script. But knives can be dangerous even when imagined. The mediator intervened with professional firmness. "This isn't a courtroom," she said. "It's a parenting plan. If either of you cannot focus on the children, we'll end the session here." Her tone carved the air cleaner than any outburst could. Silence followed, heavy but useful. Vanessa finally slumped back, nodding as if compliance might restore some dignity. I didn't gloat. Victory isn't the point in these rooms. Clarity is. We walked out with a draft agreement, temporary, fragile, but real. Outside, the air smelled different. The parking lot was cold, the sky flat. But I felt something sturdier under my feet. Not triumph, not relief. Just ground that no longer shifted every time I placed weight on it. On the drive home, I thought of Clara's words, "Finish what you must, cleanly." The knife had been in the room, yes, but it had not been mine. I had only carried paper, and paper, handled properly, cuts deep enough. The invitation arrived through the children's school. An annual banquet, parents and staff gathered in rented elegance, speeches about community, auctions for enrichment programs. In past years, Vanessa and I had gone together, another couple in coordinated clothes smiling for photos beside banners. This year, I hesitated. But the children wanted me there, and their eyes still deserved to see me in places that belonged to them. The ballroom was dressed in light, crystal chandeliers scattering fragments across linen tables, the faint clink of silverware rehearsing its part. Parents traded small talk like currency. I took a seat near the back where anonymity was safest. For a while, I succeeded. I clapped at the right cues, smiled when approached, answered polite questions with sentences that offered no entrance for rumor. And then she arrived. Vanessa entered not as a mother, but as a performance. A dress chosen for statement, makeup polished to resilience, Richard at her side as though scandal could be alchemized into legitimacy if lit by chandeliers. Conversations bent toward them like iron filings toward a magnet. I watched heads tilt, whispers ripple, eyes glance sideways. The narrative she had rehearsed online now walked on 2 feet into the room. She saw me. Her smile stretched wider, rehearsed for this stage. She pulled Richard closer, the picture of renewal, the story she preferred. If I had been a different man, I might have left. But silence, discipline, stillness, these had become my weapons, so I stayed. The evening unfolded, a speech by the principal, applause for volunteers, a slideshow of children with paint on their hands. Then came the auction, items paraded across a stage, gift baskets, vacation rentals, signed memorabilia. Richard raised his hand often, each bit a performance of generosity. The room watched. Vanessa leaned in, laughing too brightly, ensuring the camera of attention never drifted. And then the slip. One of the auction items, a weekend package at the very hotel whose receipts lay in my folder at home. The name printed in gold on the screen, projected larger than any secret could survive. I felt the air shift before the first glance even landed. Someone at the table near them whispered too loudly, connecting dots that had been waiting to be drawn. Richard's hand froze mid-bid. Vanessa's smile faltered, then returned brittle, sharp around the edges. It wasn't me. I hadn't said a word, the room itself remembered. Whispers spread faster than the auctioneer's patter. People who had nodded sympathetically to Vanessa's loneliness looked again, recalibrating. The geography of rumor rearranged itself, maps redrawn without my pen. I didn't celebrate. Vindication in public is never clean, it drips onto children, stains them. But I allowed myself one long breath, steady and silent. When the banquet ended, applause echoing too thin for the size of the room, Vanessa tried to leave with grace. Richard avoided eyes, his jaw tight, his hand no longer hovering above hers. I stayed seated, letting the crowd thin before I moved. One father clapped my shoulder as he passed, a gesture wordless but loud. On the drive home, I thought of Clara's boundary. I am not a secret passage. I am a door that opens in daylight. Tonight, daylight had arrived uninvited, breaking through chandeliers and projection screens. I hadn't planned it, hadn't wanted spectacle, but the truth had slipped into the open on its own legs. At home, I slid the children's artwork across the fridge, letting color reclaim the walls. Their drawings told stories without betrayals: dragons, castles, a soccer ball mid-kick. I chose to let those pictures be the only narrative that mattered tonight. The banquet had shown me one truth: some stories collapse under their own weight without my hand pushing. But silence alone was never enough. Betrayal leaves footprints, and they almost always lead to money. It began with a minor discrepancy, a tuition payment posted late, though my account showed the check cleared days earlier. I called the office, polite, curious. They apologized and mentioned the payment had come from a different account. My pulse slowed, then steadied. I had not authorized any different account. That night, after the children were asleep, I pulled out the folder. Receipts, ledgers, maps, they told a story of time, but money tells a story of intention. I requested bank records through the lawyer, not as accusation, but as necessity. The pages arrived, black and white, as merciless as an autopsy. There it was, an account I hadn't known existed, opened 2 years earlier in Vanessa's name alone, funded in increments that did not match our salaries. Small deposits at first, then larger, regular, rhythmic. At first glance, it could have been savings. But the withdrawals told another story: hotel payments, luxury stores, transfers that landed in accounts I could trace back to Richard. Not extravagant enough to draw suspicion, but steady enough to reveal a parallel life, financed by deception. When I confronted Vanessa in mediation, she painted it as precaution. Every woman should have independence, she said, trying to wrap betrayal in feminist cloth. But independence doesn't hide itself in boutique hotels. Independence doesn't pay for someone else's dinners while the mortgage leans on one shoulder. The mediator asked if I wanted to pursue financial misconduct. I kept my tone steady. I want transparency, I said. I want the children's lives unshaken by hidden accounts. I didn't ask for punishment, but the numbers sat in my folder like silent witnesses, ready to testify if ever called. Vanessa's mask slipped then. Her indignation turned sharp. You're digging through everything. What else will you accuse me of? I didn't answer her question. I answered the children's future instead. I will not allow secrets to become debts they inherit. Later, alone, I sat at the kitchen table with the statements spread out like a map. Every withdrawal was a breadcrumb leading away from the marriage I thought we shared. And yet, instead of rage, I felt something colder, cleaner: clarity. It wasn't about love anymore, or even betrayal. It was about accounting, not just of money, but of years of trust, of all the invisible transactions that had kept me loyal while she invested elsewhere. I slid the statements back into the folder, wrote one sentence across the cover page. This was not a fling. It was financed. The words did not taste bitter. They tasted like fact, and fact is the only currency that survives a courtroom. That night before bed, I checked on the children. Their breathing was steady, their dreams untroubled. I promised myself aloud, so quietly only the walls could hear: whatever else breaks, their foundation will not. Children don't ask for the wars their parents declare. They only hear the echoes. After the secret account surfaced, I realized every decision from that moment forward was less about winning and more about shielding. The first cracks showed in small questions. My son asked why Mom was always busy. My daughter wanted to know why she had 2 toothbrushes at 2 different houses but only one bedtime story. I could not tell them about bank accounts, about betrayal written in ledgers. But I could answer the questions beneath their questions. Are we safe? Will you leave too? So I built routines like fortresses: pancakes every Saturday morning, no exceptions. Library trips every Sunday, rain or shine. Bedtime became ceremony, reading lights out, 1 extra minute of stillness so they could ask anything, even if the only question was, do you love me? The answers were bricks. The bricks became walls, and the walls became shield. Vanessa tried to reach them through spectacle. New toys arriving suddenly, late-night promises whispered after missed dinners. She offered indulgence as if it were proof of love. But children are sharper than we think. They noticed the pattern: gifts arriving when guilt was loudest, promises swelling only to collapse. They didn't call it manipulation. They simply leaned closer into steadiness. In mediation, Vanessa accused me of turning them against her. I stayed calm. Children are not against their parents, I said. They are for whoever keeps them safe. The mediator didn't respond, but her pen slowed, and that silence was worth more than any ruling. There were nights I wanted to unload the truth into their small hands, to show them papers, receipts, to say, this is why. But shields don't explain the battlefield. Shields only hold until the danger passes. And so I bit my tongue, swallowed my anger, and let my love be the explanation they actually needed. One evening, while washing dishes, my daughter placed her drawing on the counter. It was a picture of our house, uneven lines, yellow windows glowing. Inside were 3 stick figures, me, her, and her brother. I asked where Mom was. She shrugged. She's busy, but you're here. She said it casually, not as wound, but as observation. Still, it cut sharper than any document. I folded the drawing carefully, slid it into the folder where all the evidence lived. Not because it was proof of betrayal, but because it was proof of what I was fighting for. The folder no longer only contained paper about endings. It carried paper about beginnings, too. That night, I wrote a single line on the inside cover. My shield is not revenge. It is their laughter. I turned off the light, walked past their rooms, and listened. Their breathing was even, their sleep unbroken. And I thought, if betrayal is a weapon, then fatherhood must be armor. Secrets rot when they're buried too long. By the time we reached the final hearing, there was nothing left for Vanessa to control but her performance. She entered the courtroom in muted colors, hair neatly arranged, face set in the expression of someone rehearsing innocence. Richard was absent, perhaps advised, perhaps ashamed. The children were not present either. Their world would be decided in this room, but they were spared from watching the performance. I sat with my lawyer, the folder on the table like a silent companion. Months of discipline, restraint, and silence had distilled into this moment. I hadn't wanted spectacle, but spectacle had insisted on arriving. The judge asked for statements. Vanessa's attorney began with a familiar melody. She was lonely, neglected, misunderstood. She wanted stability for the children. She wanted fairness. Words pressed into shape to hide the edges of what she had chosen. But lies, when stretched too far, eventually lose elasticity. When it was our turn, my lawyer didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He simply began laying evidence onto the table, one sheet at a time. Bank statements, hotel receipts, screenshots printed from the thumb drive Julia had handed me, and finally Meredith Hale's notarized affidavit corroborating dates and places. The paper spoke louder than any performance could. The judge's eyes lingered on certain lines. The courtroom air grew dense, the way it does when everyone realizes they're watching the truth take the stand. Vanessa's mask cracked, first in the tremor of her hands, then in the tightening of her jaw. She whispered sharply to her lawyer, but whispers don't erase ink. The cross-examination was brief. My lawyer's voice remained steady. Did you open this account? Did you stay at this hotel? Did you authorize this payment? Each answer was either evasion or concession. Each evasion was caught by the document waiting patiently in front of the judge. At one point, Vanessa broke. "This is cruelty," she snapped, tears filling her voice. "He wants to destroy me." The judge leaned forward, tone flat, cutting. "What destroys a person is not evidence. It is the choices that create it." Silence followed, heavier than any gavel. When custody terms were read, they favored stability. The children, primarily with me, structured visits for her. Financial oversight strict and monitored. It wasn't triumph. It was structure, and structure was the only justice I had asked for. Vanessa wept then, not the rehearsed tears of sympathy, but the collapse of someone whose stage had been dismantled plank by plank. She reached toward me once, as if appeal could bypass record. I didn't look away, but I didn't reach back. Some distances are permanent once crossed. As we left the courthouse, my lawyer placed a hand on my shoulder. "You handled this with dignity," he said. "Dignity hadn't been my aim. Accuracy had. But if dignity was the residue of accuracy, I would take it." That evening, I came home to drawings still taped to the fridge, to laughter from the living room where the children had built a fort from blankets and chairs. I stood in the doorway, watching their shadows dance in lamplight. They didn't know that their futures had been redrawn hours earlier in a room full of adults and evidence. They only knew their father was home. I joined them on the floor, crawled into the fort, and let them bury me in pillows. Their laughter covered me like armor. And in that moment, I understood. Exposure wasn't about her anymore. It was about ensuring their world could finally be built on something that would not collapse. In the weeks after the courtroom, the noise began to fade, but echoes still found their way through. Rumors don't vanish overnight, and betrayal doesn't stop vibrating just because a gavel has struck. What mattered was how I chose to carry the silence afterward. The first letter arrived folded carefully into my mailbox. Addressed in handwriting I recognized instantly: Vanessa's. She wrote pages without greeting, circling excuses, layering regret on top of justification. I was lonely. I felt invisible. I never meant for it to go so far. Words crafted to explain choices that needed no explanation because the evidence already told their story. I didn't reply. Some letters are meant only to sit unopened in the heart, never answered, never returned. A week later, another envelope appeared, this one from Meredith Hale. Her words were steady, precise. She thanked me for honesty, for restraint, for refusing to turn devastation into spectacle. "Your silence gave me courage to rebuild mine quietly," she wrote. She included copies of her own court filings, not for my case, but as solidarity. Two lives rerouted by the same betrayal, charting different but parallel recoveries. I kept her letter, not in the evidence folder, but in a drawer with photographs of the children. Proof that truth, even when it wounds, can connect strangers into something like allies. The third letter came from Julia, my sister. She didn't bother with long explanations. She simply wrote, "I told you because I couldn't let you keep bleeding while calling it love. I'm proud of you. The children will thank you one day, even if they never know why." I read it twice, then slid it into the same drawer as Meredith's. A drawer not of endings, but of anchors. And then, one night, after the children had gone to sleep, I sat at the table and opened a blank sheet of paper. Not for Vanessa, not for lawyers, not even for the children, for myself. I wrote what I hadn't said aloud in months. I survived a war without raising my voice. I built a shield without swinging a sword, and I am still here. I didn't sign it. I didn't fold it into an envelope. I placed it in the folder alongside the others, a final entry among ledgers and receipts. This one wasn't evidence of betrayal. It was evidence of survival. Weeks later, my daughter found me at the table, sketching absent-minded lines while I sorted bills. "Are you writing another letter?" she asked. "No," I said, smiling. "This one's just for me." She nodded as if she understood more than her years allowed, then climbed onto my lap and rested her head against my chest. Her trust was louder than any courtroom, steadier than any verdict. And in that stillness, I realized, the truest letters are not written on paper. They are written in the lives we choose to live after everything has been revealed. There is a moment, after all the papers are signed and the evidence sealed, when the temptation rises strongest, to tell the world everything. To stand on a rooftop and shout the truth so loudly that no rumor, no manipulation, no carefully crafted narrative could ever cover it again. I won't deny that urge lived in me. I imagined posting the screenshots, the statements, the affidavit. I pictured neighbors reading, friends whispering, Richard's name scorched into gossip until his smile burned away. I thought about revenge, not as justice, but as theater. And for a flicker of time, it felt possible. But then I remembered Clara's voice: "If there's going to be a future with me, it can't begin as an overlap." Her boundary had been a map. And Julia's words: "I couldn't let you keep bleeding while calling it love." And the letter I wrote myself: "I am still here." Those weren't performances, they were foundations. So instead of shouting, I chose silence. Not the silence of denial, not the silence of surrender, but the silence that refuses to feed the fire. Silence that is a shield, not a cage. Vanessa tried to bait me. Her stories shifted depending on the audience. With friends, she was the victim of neglect. With her parents, she was the woman trapped in an unloving marriage. Online, she became the misunderstood heroine who had dared to want more. Each version was designed to provoke me into battle. Each version expected me to roar back so she could point and say, "See? He is cruel, I gave her nothing." My answers remained brief, my tone, even my focus only on the children. At first, it enraged her. She sent messages dripping with accusation, each one crafted to draw blood. When they met only with quiet boundaries, "Please refer to the parenting app," her fury curdled into desperation. Silence, in the end, was louder than any exposure. But silence is not passive. It is work. It is swallowing words when your pride begs for release. It is walking away from a room where lies are being spun because you know truth doesn't need your defense. It simply needs time. It is letting go of the fantasy of revenge because you have already won the only battle that matters, the one for your own life. One night, while tucking my son into bed, he asked, "Dad, why don't you ever fight with Mom?" I paused, then answered slowly, "Because fighting doesn't make the truth louder, it only makes the noise louder." He thought about it, then nodded, satisfied. In that moment, I realized what my silence had become. Not weakness, not avoidance, but a lesson. A shield not only against chaos, but against inheritance. I could have burned her reputation to ash. Instead, I chose to let her words consume themselves. Lies eventually do. My choice was to keep building: pancakes on Saturdays, library on Sundays, blanket forts on weeknights, and slowly silence turned into peace. Revenge might have given me a headline. Silence gave me a life. Routines returned, but they no longer carried the weight of pretending. They became alive again. On Saturday mornings, the smell of pancakes wasn't camouflage for silence. It was laughter spilling into the kitchen as the children argued over who cracked the eggs better. On Sundays, the library wasn't an escape. It was a ritual of discovery, little fingers tracing titles, their voices rising in excitement as they chose stories to carry home. Even the smallest details carried new meaning. I repainted the living room in a shade called Harbor, a color I had picked without knowing why. When the last coat dried, I understood. It looked like safety. It looked like somewhere to arrive. Clara and I began to see each other in the open, not hiding, not auditioning for perfection, but allowing space to exist slowly, carefully. She met the children with kindness, not as a replacement, but as an addition, a steady presence who knew that trust is earned in moments, not declarations. For the first time, companionship didn't feel like a performance. It felt like rest. Co-parenting with Vanessa settled into something transactional. The parenting app carried most of the words we no longer needed to exchange. The fewer the messages, the fewer the battles, and that in itself was victory. She still shifted narratives for different audiences, but they no longer touched me. Her stories had become echoes in rooms I no longer entered. At night, when the house quieted, I sometimes sat with a cup of tea and thought of the man I had been, the one who kept ledgers while his heart bled, the one who mistook silence for peace. I did not resent him. He had carried me here. He had walked through betrayal so I could stand in truth. One evening, my son asked if we could build another blanket fort. My daughter brought extra pillows, insisting we make it taller this time. We climbed inside, the three of us, a small universe made of fabric and light. As they laughed, I realized something that had eluded me in all the months of courtrooms and documents. Betrayal had not destroyed us. It had, strangely, clarified us. The children learned resilience not from speeches, but from seeing that their father didn't shatter. I learned that survival is not the same as living, and that life only begins when you choose to build again. And Clara, she taught me that love doesn't need to arrive in fireworks. Sometimes it shows up as someone sitting beside you on a quiet night, hands wrapped around a mug, asking nothing more than, "How was your day?" I don't call what happened closure. Closure suggests something sealed, locked, never touched again. What I found was continuation, a life beyond betrayal, wider than the wreckage, steadier than the silence. And as I turned off the lights that night, listening to the children's laughter settle into steady breathing, I whispered the sentence I had written to myself months before: "I am still here." But this time, it no longer sounded like survival. It sounded like the beginning of everything else. And that brings this story. She betrayed our marriage, but her breakdown came when I chose divorce to its end. Betrayal always has a price, and sometimes the real breakdown happens not when the truth is hidden, but when it finally stands in daylight. What would you have done in his place? Would you have walked away or tried to rebuild what was already broken? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Cheating Stories 7, hit the like button, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next dramatic chapter. Until then, thank you for watching, and remember, every choice leaves a story behind.